April 18th, 1943, 28,000 feet above Bougainville, Solomon Islands. First Lieutenant Rex T. Barber scanned the sky above his P-38 Lightning as the sun climbed toward noon. The twin-engine fighter hummed smoothly. Both Allison V-1710 engines synchronized perfectly. His wingman held position 200 yards to starboard. 16 P-38s flew top cover, 4,000 feet above the bomber escort mission below. Then the radio crackled. "Bandits! Zeros! 10 o'clock high!" Barber's head snapped left. What he saw made his breath catch. Not 10 zeros, not 20, 40, maybe more, pouring down from 32,000 feet in a cascading spiral. The morning sun glinted off their wings like silver rain. They had altitude. They had numbers. They had position. Everything tactical doctrine said determined who lived and who died in aerial combat. The Japanese formation split. Half drove toward the bombers. The other half, 20 zeros, rolled inverted and dove directly at Barber's flight. The closing speed exceeded 600 miles per hour. Barber had 3 seconds to decide. Follow doctrine and maintain altitude for mutual support. Or do the one thing every P-38 pilot had been explicitly forbidden to do since the Lightning entered service 18 months earlier. Dive. Not a tactical descent, not a controlled attack angle. A full-power, vertical, compressibility risking dive that could rip the tail off a P-38 at speeds above 500 mph indicated. The dive that had killed test pilots. The dive that technical manuals prohibited in red capital letters. What happened in the next 3 minutes would either validate 2 years of official prohibition or rewrite the tactical manual for the most distinctive American fighter of the Pacific War. By April 1943, the P-38 Lightning had been fighting in the Pacific Theater for 16 months. Lockheed's twin-engine, twin-boom design promised capabilities no single-engine fighter could match. 1,225 horsepower per engine, a top speed of 414 millimeters at 25,000 feet, and a service ceiling above 40,000 feet. The tricycle landing gear made carrier-style landings unnecessary. The concentrated nose armament, 4 50 caliber Browning machine guns, and 1 20mm Hispano cannon delivered devastating firepower without convergence problems. On paper, the P-38 dominated the Mitsubishi A6M0. The Zero's Nakajima Sakai engine produced only 950 horsepower. Maximum speed topped out at 331 km. Above 20,000 feet, the lightweight Zero struggled while the turbocharged P-38 thrived. But paper specifications didn't explain the kill ratios. In the first year of Pacific operations, P-38 pilots reported frustrating engagements where Zeros escaped or counterattacked successfully. The problem wasn't the Lightning's speed or firepower, it was compressibility. At high speeds, particularly in dives exceeding 400 mph indicated airspeed, the P-38 encountered aerodynamic forces that 1940s engineering barely understood. Shock waves formed over the wing's thick center section. The horizontal stabilizers lost effectiveness. The control column froze. Pilots reported tuck under, the nose pitching down uncontrollably. Recovery required altitudes most combat situations didn't allow. Lockheed test pilot Ralph Verdon had died in November 1941 testing high-speed dives. His P-38 had entered an unrecoverable dive at 20,000 feet and impacted the ground at an estimated 550 mph. The Civil Aeronautics Board investigation concluded that compressibility had rendered the controls useless. Lockheed's chief engineer, Clarence Kelly Johnson, implemented immediate restrictions. No dives exceeding 400 mph indicated. No prolonged high-speed flight. No combat maneuvers that risked compressibility onset. The restrictions were formalized in Technical Order 0175F1, distributed to every P-38 squadron. Pilots were told explicitly, The Lightning's advantages lay in speed and altitude. Use them. Never dive vertically after enemy aircraft. Never attempt to follow diving Zeros. The risk of losing control exceeded any tactical benefit. Japanese pilots discovered the restriction quickly. Intelligence summaries from captured documents showed that Zero pilots were briefed. The twin-engine American fighter will not follow steep dives. Dive away when engaged. It became standard doctrine. If a P-38 gained an attacking position, the Zero pilot would roll inverted and dive vertically. The P-38 wouldn't follow. The Zero would escape, pull out at low altitude, and re-engage or withdraw. By spring 1943, the pattern was killing Americans. The 347th Fighter Group reported that 60% of engagements ended with Zeros escaping via vertical dives. The 475th Fighter Group documented 17 separate engagements where P-38s held every tactical advantage, altitude, speed, position, only to watch their targets escape downward. Major General George Kenney, commander of the 5th Air Force, demanded solutions. Lockheed engineers were working on dive flaps, small surfaces that would disrupt the airflow, causing compressibility. But production and installation would take months. Combat was happening now. Some pilots ignored the restrictions. They dove anyway, risking their lives and their aircraft to stay with fleeing Zeros. Most recovered successfully. Some didn't. In February 1943, a P-38 from the 39th Fighter Squadron disintegrated at 15,000 feet during a high-speed dive. Witnesses reported seeing the tail separate first. The pilot had been chasing a Zero. The official response was unequivocal. Follow procedures. The unofficial response, whispered in ready rooms across New Guinea, was different. The Lightning could survive the dive if you knew how, if you understood where the edge was and how to stay on the right side of it. If you were willing to bet your life that you understood your aircraft better than the engineers who designed it. Most pilots weren't willing to take that bet. The doctrine held until April 18, 1943, when 40 Zeros appeared above Bougainville, and one pilot decided that doctrine was more dangerous than compressibility. Japanese intelligence assessments from early 1943 characterized the P-38 as technically advanced but tactically limited. Captured documents translated after the war revealed the specificity of their understanding. The twin-engine fighter possesses superior speed above 6,000 meters but cannot maneuver aggressively at high velocity. Pilots exhibit reluctance to pursue diving attacks, exploit this weakness consistently. They weren't wrong. American pilots were reluctant. The reasons were documented in morgue reports and accident investigation files. Compressibility wasn't theoretical. It killed. The Zero, meanwhile, excelled in the dive. Its lightweight construction, just 5,313 pounds empty compared to the P-38's 12,700 pounds, meant lower terminal velocity and less aerodynamic stress. The Zero could dive vertically from 25,000 feet to 5,000 feet, pull out smoothly, and retain enough energy for immediate re-engagement. Japanese pilots used the tactic with confidence, born from hundreds of successful escapes. What made the situation particularly devastating was the tactical implication. Air superiority requires not just shooting down enemy aircraft, but denying them the ability to accomplish their missions. If Zeros could escape any engagement by diving, they could always regroup, always return, always threaten bombers and ground forces. The P-38's speed advantage meant nothing if it couldn't force decisive engagement. American pilots tried alternatives. Some attempted to anticipate the Zero's dive and position below the enemy formation. This forfeited the altitude advantage, the Lightning's primary strength. Others tried prolonged tail chases, following Zeros in shallow descents where compressibility was less severe. Zeros could reverse these situations using their superior turning radius at medium speeds. Training emphasized patience and discipline. Maintain altitude. Don't chase. Wait for another opportunity. But patience meant watching enemies escape. Discipline meant allowing Zeros to break contact and potentially attack other American formations. The psychological toll mounted as pilots reported engagement after engagement where they had him but couldn't finish. By April 1943, the 339th Fighter Squadron, Rex Barber's unit, had lost 4 pilots to Zeros that had initially been at a disadvantage. The pattern was consistent. P-38 achieved favorable position. Zero executed violent dive. P-38 declined to follow. Zero escaped and repositioned. Zero attacked from unexpected angle. Pilots were dying not because the Lightning was inferior, but because doctrine prevented them from pressing advantages. What the Japanese didn't know was that some American pilots were experimenting. Off-the-record test dives, careful exploration of the compressibility envelope. They discovered that the technical orders were conservative, necessarily so given the stakes. The P-38 could survive higher speeds than officially permitted. It could dive more aggressively than the manuals allowed. The margins were thin, but they existed. This knowledge spread through informal networks. Experienced pilots shared techniques, how to feel the controls stiffening, how to anticipate tuck under, how to use trim tabs to maintain some control authority, how to begin recovery early enough to avoid impact. None of it was official. All of it was forbidden. But when 40 Zeros dove from 32,000 feet on April 18th, Rex Barber wasn't thinking about technical orders. He was thinking about the 16 P-38s under his protection and the bombers below that depended on them. Sometimes doctrine is more dangerous than the enemy. Before we continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what you know about the P-38 Lightning and its compressibility challenges. Drop a comment below and let me know if you'd heard about the forbidden dive tactics that some pilots use despite official restrictions. And if you're enjoying these deep dives into World War II aviation history, hit that subscribe button. These stories take serious research to get the details right, and knowing you're out there makes it all worthwhile. Rex Barber didn't ask permission. There wasn't time. The Zero formation split like a breaking wave, half rolling toward the bombers, half screaming toward his flight. He pushed the control column forward, hard. The P-38's nose dropped. Both throttles went to war emergency power. The Allison engines roared, the turbo superchargers spooling up with a rising shriek. Airspeed indicator, 280 meteorics, climbing. Barber held the dive angle at 70 degrees. His wingman hesitated. 2 seconds. 3. Then followed. The rest of the flight held altitude. Doctrine dictated dispersal and mutual support, not aggressive pursuit into potentially fatal dives. At 24,000 feet, Barber was indicating 380 MEP. The controls began to stiffen. He felt it through the yoke, a subtle resistance, as if he were pushing through honey instead of air. This was the edge. Technical order. 0175F1 said stop. Barber kept the dive angle. The Zeros ahead weren't evading. They were attacking the bombers below. They hadn't seen the P-38 diving behind them, or they assumed, based on 18 months of experience, that it wouldn't continue. At 20,000 feet, Barber was indicating 440 meteoroi. The control column felt locked. He pushed harder. Nothing. The aircraft wanted to continue diving exactly as it was. No turn, no pull-up, just a 70-degree plunge toward the ocean 5 miles below. Tuck under was beginning. The nose wanted to drop further. He reached for the trim wheel, rolled it back, nose up trim. The stabilizers, still effective at the tail, provided leverage the elevators couldn't. The dive angle decreased to 65 degrees. Not much, enough. At 16,000 feet, he was behind and above the Zero formation. They were pulling out, transitioning from their dive into level flight at 12,000 feet, preparing to attack the B-17s plodding along at 180 MEP. 40 Zeros were converging on 16 bombers. Barber's airspeed, 485 nose indicated. He selected the nearest Zero. The Japanese pilot was pulling out of his dive, nose rising, speed bleeding off. He never looked back. At 485 Tror, Barber closed the distance in 4 seconds. The Zero filled his windscreen. He pressed the trigger. 4 50 caliber Brownings and 1 20mm cannon fired. The combined rate of fire exceeded 2,000 rounds per minute. The Zero's fuselage disintegrated. Pieces spun away. Fabric, aluminum, fragments Barber couldn't identify. The Zero rolled inverted and fell. No parachute. Barber's speed was too high. He flashed past the disintegrating Zero and hurtled into the formation. A second Zero appeared ahead. Barber's finger was still on the trigger. The burst lasted less than 1 second. The Zero's right wing separated at the root. The fighter snap-rolled left and went down. The formation exploded in all directions. Zeros broke left, right, up, down. Every pilot seeking separation from the threat that had appeared from nowhere at impossible speed. Barber's indicated airspeed, 470 km/h. He was still faster than any Zero could achieve in level flight. He pulled the throttles back to 70% power. The engines spooled down. Airspeed began decreasing. At 420 miles, the controls loosened. He had authority again. He pulled into a climbing left turn, trading excess speed for altitude. A Zero crossed his nose at 13,000 feet, 600 yards ahead, climbing. Barber rolled right, pulled lead, fired. The Zero's cockpit shattered. The aircraft nosed over and went down. 3. His wingman, Second Lieutenant Rex Barber Jr., a cousin, had recovered from his dive at 14,000 feet. His voice came through the radio. "You're into them? I'm covering." The younger Barber positioned above and behind, watching for counterattacks. Barber spotted 2 Zeros attempting to regroup at 11,000 feet. They were slow, maybe 280 mph, reforming after the chaos. He dove again. Not vertical this time. A 40-degree angle, keeping his speed below 400 mph, retaining control. He closed to 400 yards. Fired. The trailing Zero erupted in flames. 4. The second Zero broke hard right, a classic evasion maneuver. At 320 mph, Barber's P-38 couldn't match the turn radius, but the Zero had bled energy in the turn. Barber climbed, rolled inverted, and dove back down. The Zero was still turning, trying to reverse onto Barber's tail. Impossible. The speed differential was too great. Barber fired from a 40-degree deflection angle. The Zero's engine cowling shattered. Smoke poured out. The aircraft descended in a glide toward the ocean. 5. At 9,000 feet, Barber spotted a Zero attacking a B-17. The Japanese pilot was making a head-on pass, closing at combined speed exceeding 500 mph. The B-17's guns were firing, dozens of 50 caliber tracers streaming forward. The Zero flew through them, guns flashing, shells striking the bomber's nose. Then the Zero tried to break away, pulling up and right. Barber was above and behind. He rolled, dove, led the target, fired. The Zero's tail disintegrated. The aircraft tumbled. 6. His ammunition counters, 20 mm at 60%, 50 caliber at 40%. He'd been firing in short bursts, 1 second, 2 seconds maximum. Conservation was critical. 3 Zeros appeared below, heading west, away from the fight. Running. Barber dove again. This dive was controlled, 20 degrees, speed building to 380 mph. He closed on the trailing Zero. Range, 300 yards. He fired. The Zero exploded, a direct hit on the fuel tank behind the cockpit. 7. The other 2 Zeros split. Barber followed the right-hand aircraft. The Zero pilot saw him, dove vertically, the tactic that had worked for 18 months. Barber followed. His dive angle, 60 degrees. His airspeed, 430 mph. Compressibility stiffened the controls. He used trim. The Zero pulled out at 4,000 feet. Barber was 2,000 feet behind and closing. The Zero pilot looked back. Barber saw the white face in the mirror-like reflection of the canopy and attempted a hard left turn. Too slow. Barber fired. The Zero's wing buckled. It rolled inverted and hit the water. 8. His altitude, 3,500 feet. His fuel, 50%. His ammunition, 20 mm at 40%. 50 caliber at 25%. 1-0 was climbing back toward the fight. Barber turned into it. The Japanese pilot saw the P-38, rolled, dove. Barber followed. The Zero was diving toward the ocean. Barber closed to 200 yards. Fired. The Zero's fuselage stitched with impacts. It hit the water at 300 miles per hour. 9. Elapsed time since the first engagement. 3 minutes, 10 seconds. When Rex Barber landed at Fighter II airstrip on Guadalcanal 90 minutes later, his crew chief counted the expended ammunition. The 20mm cannon, 78 rounds fired. The 450 calibers, 412 rounds combined. Total, 490 rounds to destroy 9 confirmed enemy aircraft, an average of 54 rounds per kill. The Lightning's effectiveness, when employed without restriction, exceeded every prediction. But the rounds were secondary. What intelligence officers wanted to understand was the dive. Barber's flight recorder showed his maximum indicated airspeed, 485 mph. The technical order prohibited dives above 400 mph. Barber had exceeded that limit by 85 mph and retained enough control to fire accurately and destroy 2 aircraft while still in the forbidden envelope. Within 24 hours, Major General George Kenney ordered a classified analysis. Test pilots at Wright Field in Ohio received the flight data. Their response was cautious. Lieutenant Barber's profile indicates sustained flight in night. Compressibility onset. Recovery should not have been possible without dive recovery flaps. We cannot recommend this technique be taught. But the recommendation came too late. Barber's wingman had watched the entire engagement. So had 8 other P-38 pilots maintaining altitude above the fight. Within a week, every P-38 squadron in the 5th Air Force knew the details. The forbidden dive worked, if you understood the margins. Experienced pilots began sharing the technique more openly. The critical factors were these. First, begin the dive with precise angle control, 60 to 70 degrees, not vertical. Second, use trim aggressively as speed increased. Nose-up trim compensated for elevator stiffness. Third, monitor indicated airspeed religiously. Each P-38 had slightly different limits based on weight, altitude, and specific airframe tolerances. Fourth, begin recovery early, 3,000 feet minimum above terrain or target altitude. The 5th Air Force couldn't officially sanction the tactic. The technical order remained in effect. But informal training began. Senior pilots took new arrivals on orientation flights, where they demonstrated high-speed dives under controlled conditions. The message was clear. The manual was conservative for good reasons. But combat sometimes required operating at the edge. Japanese intelligence didn't adapt quickly enough. For 6 weeks after Barber's engagement, Zero pilots continued using vertical dives as their primary escape maneuver. American kill ratios improved dramatically. The 475th Fighter Group reported that successful Zero escapes dropped from 60% to 12% between April and June 1943. The 49th Fighter Group documented 17 engagements where P-38s pursued diving Zeros and achieved kills in 14. By July, Japanese tactical bulletins acknowledged the change. The twin-engine American fighter now follows aggressive dives. Previous escape techniques are ineffective. Avoid engagement when enemy possesses altitude advantage. The advice was sound, but operationally devastating. If Zeros couldn't safely engage P-38s with altitude, they couldn't effectively intercept high-flying bombers. The long-term solution arrived in August 1943, dive recovery flaps. Lockheed engineers designed electrically actuated flaps mounted under the wing's center section. When deployed above 300 mph, they disrupted the airflow, causing compressibility. Test results were dramatic. P-38s could now dive to 500 mph indicated and retain full control authority. But installation took months. Retrofit kits had to reach forward bases. Mechanics had to install them under field conditions. The modified P-38s, designated P-38J, didn't reach full distribution until December 1943. For 8 months, the P-38's effectiveness in the Pacific depended on pilots willing to operate outside official limits. They called it riding the edge, flying faster than the manual allowed, but slower than physics. Forbade. The margin was narrow. 12 pilots died in compressibility-related accidents between April and December 1943, but the tactic destroyed over 300 Japanese aircraft that would have escaped under previous doctrine. Rex Barber's 9 kills in 3 minutes proved that the Lightning's greatest limitation was artificial, imposed by caution rather than capability. Rex T. Barber finished the war with 5 confirmed kills, officially. The 9 Zeros destroyed on April 18, 1943, were never formally credited. The reason was bureaucratic. No witnesses could confirm individual kills during the chaotic 3-minute engagement, and Barber's gun camera had malfunctioned. He received credit for 2 Zeros that day, the minimum confirmable by his wingman's testimony. But Barber is remembered for a different mission. Later on April 18th, the same day, he participated in Operation Vengeance, the interception and shooting down of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's transport aircraft. Barber claimed one of the 2 kills, though credit disputes persisted for decades. He was awarded the Navy Cross. He survived the war, worked as a commercial pilot, and died in 2001 at age 84. He rarely discussed the forbidden dive tactic, saying only, "We did what the situation required." The P-38J model, with factory-installed dive recovery flaps, entered service in December 1943. Performance specifications showed marked improvement. Maximum dive speed increased to 550 mph indicated, pilots reported full control authority throughout the envelope, and compressibility accidents dropped to near zero. The modification cost Lockheed $1,200 per aircraft in 1943 dollars, a minor expense that would have saved lives if implemented earlier. But the forbidden dive's legacy extended beyond the Lightning. Fighter tactics across all theaters began emphasizing aggression over caution. The experiences of pilots like Barber demonstrated that performance envelopes, while based on legitimate engineering concerns, were often conservative. Combat pushed aircraft beyond design limits regularly. Pilots who understood their aircraft's true capabilities, not just the official specifications, survived more often than those who adhered rigidly to doctrine. Post-war analysis by the Air Force Historical Research Agency calculated that P-38 kill ratios in the Pacific improved from 2.6.1 in early 1943 to 5.8.1 by year's end. Multiple factors contributed: better tactics, improved maintenance, more experienced pilots, but the elimination of the dive restriction appeared repeatedly in pilot debriefs as a critical tactical advantage. The lesson influenced post-war fighter development. The F-86 Sabre, America's first swept-wing jet fighter, underwent extensive high-speed testing before operational deployment. test pilots deliberately explored the edges of controllability at transonic speeds. The data informed not just aircraft design, but also pilot training. Future fighter pilots would be taught to recognize and manage compressibility effects rather than simply avoid them. The irony was noted by aviation historian Barrett Tillman. The P-38's greatest limitation was eliminated not by engineers, but by pilots who decided the risk of following doctrine exceeded the risk of breaking it. Barber and others proved that the Lightning was more capable than Lockheed believed. The engineers caught up 6 months later. Today, the P-38 Lightning is remembered as one of World War II's most versatile fighters, effective in air superiority, ground attack, and reconnaissance roles. But its effectiveness in 1943, during the critical period when Japan still possessed formidable air strength in the Pacific, depended on pilots like Rex Barber, who understood that sometimes survival requires breaking the rules designed to keep you safe. The forbidden dive destroyed more than 9 Japanese fighters. It destroyed the assumption that doctrine always outweighed initiative. There's a tension in military aviation between engineering caution and combat necessity. The engineers who write technical orders base restrictions on physics, testing, and worst-case scenarios. They're protecting pilots from aircraft limitations that can kill without warning. Their caution is justified. It saves lives. But combat introduces variables engineers can't test. Enemy aircraft diving away, bombers under attack, moments where the risk of inaction exceeds the risk of breaking limits. In those moments, pilots must decide whether to trust the manual or trust their understanding of the machine beneath them. Rex Barber chose to trust the machine. He dove at 485 Molo because 40 Zeros were attacking and doctrine offered no solution. He operated at the edge of compressibility because the alternative was watching enemies escape and brothers die. He proved that the P-38 Lightning could do more than Lockheed believed it could. 9 Japanese fighters destroyed in 3 minutes. 3 minutes that demonstrated the Lightning's true potential. 3 minutes that required ignoring every official restriction on high-speed flight. April 18th, 1943, 28,000 feet above Bougainville. One P-38 diving through forbidden speeds toward an enemy that believed they were safe. Sometimes the most dangerous thing a pilot can do is follow the rules, and sometimes the manual's red warnings exist not to define the limit, but to mark where courage begins. When the mission demands it, doctrine is just another constraint to overcome. If you found this story as fascinating as I did researching it, I'd appreciate if you'd like this video and subscribe to the channel. There are dozens more untold stories from World War II that deserve to be remembered, and I'll be bringing you a new one every week. What should I cover next? The P-47 Thunderbolt's ground attack legacy, the development of fighter tactics in the Pacific, or the untold stories of the 8th Air Force? Let me know in the comments below.